At NEO 437 local time, 20 nautical miles south of Sri Lanka, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine was doing what American submarines do better than anyone on Earth, hunting enemy ships 7 nautical miles ahead. The IRIS Dena, one of Iran's few remaining surface combatants, was pinging active sonar, zigzagging at 15 knots, hunting for whatever was trailing her. Soon, CENTCOM would give the sub's captain an order that no American submarine commander had received since World War II. The sub just had to get into position first. With her hull sonar active, the Dena was desperately hammering the ocean with pings. Her ASR 3D radar swept the full 360-degree, and every 3 to 5 minutes, the captain swung the ship on random course changes, turning the Americans' fire control solution into a math problem that reset itself before anyone could solve it. The tactic exploited a simple weakness in submarine targeting. Submarines actively hunting a ship just use their passive sonar that gives bearing only, direction, not distance. It's like using the compass on your phone instead of Google Maps. You know which way to go, but you have no idea if the destination is 1 mile away or 10. The fire control technician stared at his waterfall display, watching the Dena's bearing line creep across the screen 1 degree at a time. That creep was everything. By measuring how that bearing shifted over minutes, feeding it into targeting algorithms called Target Motion Analysis, or TMA, the technician could triangulate range, course, and speed, a green line on his display converging toward a firing solution like a blurry photo slowly coming into focus. Except the Iranian captain kept shaking the camera every time the picture almost got sharp. Then the Dena zigged, the green line scattered, half the work evaporated. The technician started over. New bearing, new hypothesis, new convergence crawling toward a solution that the Iranian captain would blow apart with another random turn in 90 seconds. Imagine trying to measure the exact distance to a car by the sound of its engine while somebody keeps changing lanes. That was the fire control team's morning. The Iranian captain had spent 2 weeks at Milan 2026, multinational naval exercises with the Indian Navy, practicing exactly these anti-submarine procedures. The Americans had watched. Now, one of those submarines was trailing the Dena like a patient ghost, and the captain's Milan training was the only card he had left to play. But that wasn't what worried the crew. What worried them was sitting on the Dena's aft flight deck, the SH-3 Sea King anti-submarine warfare helicopter. It carried a low-frequency dipping sonar purpose-built to do one thing: find submarines where hull sonar can't reach. Think of it this way. The Dena's hull sonar was shouting into the ocean from the surface and hoping for an echo. The dipping sonar drops a microphone directly into the submarine's living room. The Sea King hovers, lowers a transducer on a cable straight through the thermal layer, and pings from the same acoustic environment the submarine is hiding in. That thermal shield, keeping the sub invisible, stops working the instant that transducer microphone splashes below it. It's the acoustic equivalent of hiding behind a curtain while someone walks around to your side of the room. And the Dena's helicopter crew knew how to use it. One competent helicopter crew could leapfrog across the ocean, sanitizing the search box the sub was sitting in the middle of faster than a surface ship could cover the same ground in a full day. 400 FT down. You can't see a thing topside. You listen. A helicopter spooling up has a sound signature. Turbine whine, rotor engagement, the sharp transient of liftoff. The sonar team strained to hear any of it through the ambient noise. Nothing so far. But the absence of sound through the thermocline, dozens of merchant ships, the snapping shrimp colonies crackling on the continental shelf, that absence guaranteed nothing. If the Sea King launched while the sub closed the range, the Americans had 2 options: shoot immediately before the helicopter establishes a search pattern, or go deep and lose the window entirely. There was no middle ground. For now, the thermocline was doing its job. A boundary where warm surface water meets cooler deep water, bending sound the way a prism bends light. The Dena's pings hit that boundary and refracted upward, curving away from the submarine, painting an empty ocean on the Iranian sonar screens. 400 FT down, the sub was a hole in the water. Except the thermocline isn't a wall, it's a lens. And lenses have quirks. The sonar chief watched one of those quirks threaten to expose him. Sound traveling through deep water doesn't just disappear. It bends downward, strikes density boundaries, and arcs back toward the surface at roughly 30 nautical mile intervals. Convergence zones, places where a ping should have petered out 50 miles ago, arrives gift-wrapped on a sonar screen. One lucky geometry from the Dena. One ping catching the right arc at the right angle, and the Iranian operator paints a contact he can't explain, sitting exactly where the submarine is. Worse, the layer was thinning. The technicians had been dropping expendable bathythermographs to measure the water around them. 3 clocks were now running against them. The thermal layer was thinning by the hour. Every bathythermograph reading came back warmer than the last, and the sonar chief estimated 6 to 8 hours before the layer degraded past reliable concealment. The Dena was steaming roughly parallel to the Sri Lankan coast at 15 knots. At current course and speed, she crossed the 12 nautical mile territorial limit in approximately 40 minutes, and once she did, the shot evaporated under international law. And on the aft flight deck, the Sea King sat fueled, armed, and one captain's order away from turning the submarine's hiding spot into an open auditorium. Any one of those clocks running out would end the mission. All 3 were ticking simultaneously. So, at 0441, with the layer thinning, the helicopter a coin flip from launching, and the fire control team wrestling a zigzagging target through an ocean full of noise, the sub needed something it couldn't get from down here. The execute authorization from CENTCOM couldn't reach operating depth. ELF radio, extremely low frequency, the only signal that penetrates deep water, carries almost zero bandwidth. Think of it as the world's most expensive text message, and the only thing it can say is "call me," enough to tell the sub to come shallow, not enough to transmit a targeting authorization for what comes next. To get the order, they had to come to periscope depth. That meant rising from the thermal layer that had been keeping them hidden, entering the water column where the Dena's hull sonar worked best, pushing a communications mast above the waterline, and into an ASR 3D radar's detection envelope that was scanning for exactly the kind of small transient contact a periscope mast creates. A thin metal tube barely above the surface, appearing for seconds. One full sweep of the ASR at the wrong moment, and an Iranian radar operator sitting at his screen in a wartime posture gets the return he's been praying he wouldn't see. But the crew had a trick for that. A South Korean LNG tanker, 200,000 tons of liquefied natural gas, was plowing through the corridor 5 miles to the southeast, throwing a massive radar return on every scope within 50 miles. The sub's navigator had been tracking her for the past hour, waiting for the geometry to align. If the sub came to periscope depth along the exact line of bearing between the tanker and the Dena, the mast would sit in the tanker's radar shadow. Any return the ASR painted would look like a ghost, a side lobe reflection from 200,000 tons of steel, not a submarine. It's the radar equivalent of sneaking across a room by staying directly behind someone bigger than you. If the person watching only sees one silhouette, they'll never know there were 2. The Iranian radar operator would see it, check the bearing, see the tanker sitting right behind it, and dismiss it as clutter. Submarine captains have been hiding behind merchant ships since the Cold War. Tonight, a South Korean gas tanker was going to earn the most thankless assist in naval history without ever knowing it. At 0448, the geometry lined up. The officer of the deck called the ascent. The sub rose through the thermocline. Flow noise building on the hull. The thermal shield peeling away. The sonar picture degrading as ambient surface noise flooded in. 3 days of invisibility traded for a few seconds with a mast above the waterline, tucked behind a merchant ship's radar shadow. The communications mast broke the surface. Satellite link locked. Message traffic streamed down. Authorization confirmed. The sub dove back beneath the layer. The thermocline closed over them like a door. On the fire control displays, the Dena's bearing ticked eastward, still zigzagging, still pinging, but now the geography was squeezing them. At 0451, the Dena's course tracked parallel to the Sri Lankan coast, 20 nautical miles offshore. The 12 nautical mile territorial limits, sitting 8 miles to the north. International law made those waters untouchable. If the Iranian captain got spooked and turned toward shore, the shot evaporated, and a captain watching his navy get smacked down like they did had every reason to hug the coast. His crew would rather be turned by Colombo than torpedoed by something they couldn't see. Every minute the sub waited, the Dena steamed closer to the line where a single course change would carry her inside the sanctuary. One more constraint was still pressing in from behind. The sub was still streaming the towed array. Hundreds of feet of sensor cable trailing behind the boat, her sharpest ear. But the moment that torpedo launched, if the sub needed to maneuver hard, that array became a leash. You can't retrieve it quickly. Aggressive turns risk tangling the cable or snapping it clean off. The boat's best sensor was about to become its biggest problem at the worst possible moment. At 453, the fire control team locked the solution. The weapons officer programmed the Mark 48 AD cap in Tube 1. The captain gave the order. And what happened next was the loudest thing the sub would do all day, in an ocean where the Dena was listening for exactly that sound. The torpedo tube flooded. Seawater rushed in to equalize with external pressure. A sharp acoustic transient that a trained sonar operator recognizes the way a parent recognizes their child crying in a crowded room. Unmistakable. The crew bet everything on the thermocline, the shipping noise, and a million snapping shrimp drowning out one submarine's worst moment. If the Dena sonar team caught that transient through the noise, the next 60 seconds would go very differently. The Mark 48 dropped from the tube. 21 inches in diameter, 3,500 lb of guided precision running on Auto Fuel 2, a monopropellant that carries its own oxidizer, needs no air intake, and produces no exhaust bubbles rising to betray the shot. The engine drove a pump jet propulsor instead of a traditional screw. No cavitation trail, no white line on the surface. The torpedoes that sank ships in 1945 drew a visible streak straight back to the submarine that fired them. A neon arrow saying, "Shoot here." The Mark 48 left nothing. The only signature was acoustic. Engine hums swallowed by the ambient roar of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. A whisper in a stadium. A wire spooled out behind the weapon, hair-thin, connecting the torpedo to the fire control technician's console. Through that wire, the operator could steer the weapon around obstacles, adjust for target maneuvers, override the seeker if countermeasures confused it. Think of it as driving a car by holding a single thread taped to the steering wheel from 7 miles away, blindfolded, while someone else decides whether to cut the thread. The trade-off? The sub was now chained in place, locked on course and depth, unable to maneuver, unable to run. Nothing that might stress or snap that thread. If the wire broke, the torpedo went autonomous. Still dangerous, but nobody would be driving. And there were reasons somebody might need to drive. At transit speed, the Mark 48 was deaf. Flow noise over the sonar dome drowned the ocean out completely. The fire control technician steered blind through the wire, watching guidance data scroll across his display, threading a weapon doing 55 knots through a shipping lane where a wrong turn put a warhead into a merchant vessel 7 nautical miles to the Dena and shrinking. If she made an unexpected turn toward those Sri Lankan territorial waters to the north, the technician had seconds to bend the torpedo's track through a wire thinner than a pencil to a weapon that couldn't see where it was going. At 5 miles, the Dena zigzagged. The bearing shifted on the fire control display. The technician adjusted the torpedo's gyro course through the wire, bending the intercept geometry to match the new heading. Every correction ate more wire. Every degree of turn lowered the margin between guided weapon and expensive noisemaker. 4 miles. The continental shelf off Galle, Sri Lanka, drops away into deep Indian Ocean water. The depth gradient squeezed the torpedo's performance envelope from every direction. Too shallow and the weapon broaches the surface. Too deep and the runtime stretches, handing the Dena extra seconds to turn or make for good water. The three-dimensional box the navigator had been managing shrank with every mile. 3 miles, the Dena pinged again, the sonar pulse radiating outward through the water, passing over the torpedo like a searchlight sweeping past a burglar. The Mark 48 torpedo was small enough and fast enough that the return, if there was one, would look like biologics on the Dena sonar screen. Probably the word submarine crews learned to live with. 2 miles, the Mark 48 slowed. Flow noise dropped, and the torpedo woke up. The onboard sonar, a 2D phased array seeker, electronically steered, started painting the water ahead. Active pinging, high frequency. A 1,500-ton frigate pushing 15 knots of displaced water through the Indian Ocean is not a subtle target. The seeker locked the Dena almost instantly. Terminal acquisition. The weapon accelerated for the final run. Now the Dena heard it. Somewhere on that ship, a sonar operator caught what every sailor in every navy prays he never hears. Active pinging. Closing fast. Bearing consistent. Bearing consistent means it's not passing by. He hit the alarm. The bridge heard it. The captain heard it. 15 seconds separated that moment from impact. 15 seconds. The Dena carried acoustic decoys, expendable noisemakers designed to seduce torpedo seekers away from the real hull. Getting them in the water meant recognizing the threat, authorizing countermeasures, and throwing them over the side. That sequence takes a trained crew on a good day longer than 15 seconds. A hard turn. A 2,500-ton frigate at 15 knots needs hundreds of meters to come about. She didn't have hundreds of meters. The triple 324mm torpedo launchers on the aft deck could reach 30 kilometers, but firing requires a bearing on the submarine. And that sub sat 400 FT beneath the thermocline. Invisible, untouchable, patient. The Dena could hear the torpedo arriving and had no idea where it lived, even if the decoys had somehow made it into the water. And that's a generous if. Behind the seeker through the wire, the fire control technician sat ready to override the torpedo's brain and steer it manually past the noise onto 1,500 tons of real steel. This is why the wire mattered. This is why the sub had stayed frozen for the entire run. The Mark 48 didn't hit the hull. It passed beneath the keel and detonated. The warhead's magnetic influence fuse detected the Dena's steel hull overhead and fired at the optimal point, directly beneath the keel, the structural spine of the ship. The explosion created a gas bubble that expanded upward with enough force to lift the Dena's 1,500-ton stern clean out of the Indian Ocean. Imagine picking up a steel ruler by both ends and bending it until it snaps. Except the ruler weighs 1,500 tons, and the thing bending it is a column of superheated gas rising from beneath. For a fraction of a second, the frigate hung in the air with nothing beneath her keel, structural members bearing a load no ship was ever built to carry alone. The bubble collapsed, the stern fell, the keel snapped. Pentagon periscope footage released 6 hours later showed exactly this. The bow pitched skyward, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky as the aft section dragged everything down. 94 meters of Iranian naval engineering folded in half and slipped beneath the Indian Ocean. At 0508 local time, the distress call went out. By the time Sri Lankan rescue boats reached the coordinates, there was nothing but oil slicks, debris, and life rafts drifting from the pre-dawn current. The sub slipped back below the thermocline. No periscope, no transmission, no trace, and the towed array kept streaming as though the last 40 minutes had been a drill. The reactor hummed. The ocean closed over the space where she'd been. Note on real events, for context. This incident is based on the actual March 4, 2026, sinking of IRIS Dena during the U.S.-Iran conflict. Reports confirm a U.S. Los Angeles-class submarine, USS Charlotte, fired Mark 48 torpedoes, 1 or 2, with 1 hit, sinking the frigate in international waters, Nars 19-20 Nemanur off Gala, Sri Lanka. Casualties: 87 killed, 61 missing, 32 rescued. The Pentagon released periscope video showing the underkeel detonation and ship breaking. U.S. officials described it as the first U.S. submarine torpedo sinking of an enemy ship since Doidisi. Iran condemned it as an atrocity. Debates continue over the ship's armament status and legal aspects under naval warfare rules.